This is the International Community Research Group. Lots of great experts there, and I'm really just hoping to present problems that Rachel and I have had in also the group work, but also her doctoral thesis, which is part of it. Now, I'll just present the project briefly. It's a joint doctoral project with KU Leuven. Main supervisors Rena Meilets and myself. Rena specializes in translation policy, and I don't specialize in anything. So it's a dialogue there. And we set up that project with that title, and it got funded. All right. So the two doctoral students, Rachel and Khadija, were lumbered with that project coming in, and that for me is problematic, and I'm quite willing to discuss that as well. Should we give students a topic to work on to do research, or should they develop it themselves? In this particular case, because of the way it was set up, it was the former. We advertised for people who want to work on that particular topic there, and then we selected the candidate. Khadija, I understand, is of Moroccan heritage, growing up in Brussels, and we're not going to talk about her research here, but we might have it as points of comparison. We were looking at what happened in COVID in policy and practice in Brussels with Khadija and in Melbourne with Rachel. On the interdisciplinarity, I personally have benefited a lot from Rachel's background in policy and in the workings of policy within the political processes of the state of Victoria in Australia. So there's been lots of interaction there as well. I'll just open that as a first question to anybody. Uh, is it okay to give students a topic to work on, or should we just let everybody do what they feel most motivated to do? Any opinions on that? Or Rachel, how did you feel about that?
I personally loved it because I would have struggled to come up with something myself, and knowing that this was a topic that was selected by experts who knew that it hadn't been done before was reassuring for a PhD when you're not sure what to do. And this is, I guess, a more common practice in sciences and other disciplines where the funding is for a topic and then students apply for that. So I really liked it. It's less common in humanities, but I really liked it because I knew it was, and also the proposal was written for us, so we kind of knew what to do and what the expectations were. And then Khadija and I could shape our projects around comparative goals, around sort of doing surveys and interviews. And then because we had an output of 3 publications for this PhD, it was very helpful to work towards as a collaborative group. I think it was very helpful also having a group, sort of like a research group. It made it a lot less isolating in the PhD journey than if you're just working on the project that you've developed. I think it was very helpful. So I really liked it, and this really suited me because I'm used to, I guess, an environment where I'm given in Parliament, I was given a topic and I researched it with the committee and did public hearings on that. So that was very helpful. This is why I applied for this, and I was drawn to this based on the fact that it was such a comprehensive project. And as you mentioned, we were working with Rena Meilets, who's an expert in policy, and yourself, you're an expert in everything, I think. But it really helped because we had Hadjak's project as well, and I think it's made it a lot more easier to find comparisons and to build on that. So thank you. I appreciated it. I think we
that's about in the chat session there. Okay, if they're already leaning to it, then it's a win-win. I think it's a personality thing. I would have hated that. I had my doctoral research and I went looking for a supervisor who was going to do that. But okay, it can work both ways. As you can see from the dates, Rachel is just about at the end, right, Rachel? and looking
Yeah.
around for postdocs, and I think you're in Europe now, in Germany. There, it's very much this. We have the project. We're looking for somebody to do it, right? So it is that mindset. Any other opinions out there on this? I'm also interested in this word cult, which Mustafa just used and we used in the project. And at the time, 2021, this was common parlance in Australia, but not in Europe. CULT stands for Cultural and Linguistically Diverse Communities. And I don't like that term. What are you using now, Rachel, in your thesis? Have we got rid of it or are you still using it?
We have got rid of it. We're using, I use in my thesis multicultural communities because that is not as polarizing as some of the other terms that have been used. There is a history of different terms being adopted with different policy waves and different policy leanings, I guess. So there was sort of ethnic communities, and then there was cold, and there's been different ones. I think now in the Victorian public sector, multicultural communities has been adopted for the most common usage because it's and by NGOs as well, because it's considered more appropriate now. It's not. Yes, I think so. That's the term that I've used in my thesis. I think it's a better term. I like it more.
Okay. Mustafa says he doesn't like cult just because it's an acronym, I think, and it sort of isolates people. Yeah, multicultural has come into practice in Victoria. I think that's a misnomer as well, because the community itself is not multicultural. It is brought together because of their common culture. You can have a multicultural society, which is what we want in Australia, I think. But within that, I think they are ethno-specific communities. So that's the term I use. But Rachel can use whatever term she likes in her thesis. Okay.
The only anything with ethno or ethnic has kind of not been used after it became associated with sort of in language policy with difficulties integrating or socioeconomic problems. So there was a decision, I can't remember, I think it was in the late 90s, to do away with ethnic, the word ethnic, because previously it was NESB, I think it was non-English speaking backgrounds, and then you had ethnic. I can't quite remember, but it is in my thesis somewhere.
All right.
in the,
Okay.
I do have specifically about terminology, because terminology, it's particularly in government sector, changes so frequently, and so yeah.
I wonder if it's I'll throw it open for any opinions on this. Mustafa, you say you use cult because other people use cult, but the academic community has a role to play, I think, in the terms. If it's clear that some terms are more appropriate, we can push for it and have an influence. I don't think we have to follow what government uses necessarily. Okay, but we agree there's no good term for the thing. Is that right, Clara? The term community, yeah. In Hong Kong, ethnic minority is still in use. So is it a good thing or a bad thing, Clara? That's problematic. Okay. Can people, you can speak. I'm open to a conversation. I don't like reading chat sessions very much. Okay. Look, we'll leave
Yeah.
that one there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. That's fine, Anthony.
Yeah. Okay.
It,
So
yeah.
NESB, non-English. Yeah, Clara, tell us.
Oh, I mean, you were asking about the terms,
Yeah.
and you might know that I'm looking at this in the Hong Kong context these 2 years. So ethnic minority is still a dominant in public narrative in Hong Kong, including the government policies, things like that, which is quite problematic. Social linguists, in particular, have been examining this as well. I personally think ethnic minorities, the term is problematic
Yeah.
There are also cultural studies scholars who argue for the use of just ethnicity or like getting rid of
Yeah. That's
term of
nice. That's
minority.
abstract. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I hasten to add to everybody, I spent 38 years outside of Australia, so those debates about the word ethnic that Rachel mentioned, I would have missed. I did miss. Okay. So up to you, folks. We have no solution for that one. Okay. I'll just point out that part of this project involves collective publications by the members of it, and you'll see one, two, three, where we had to produce 3 collective publications. We have done that, and we're very proud of that. And I would recommend that for anybody doing research or in a doctoral program. Why? Firstly, because we get to discuss things, and some of these papers were really quite hard discussions within our group because we have different backgrounds, different opinions. And also, you learn a whole lot about the publishing process with good and bad one, with easy and more rigorous review processes. So, for example, the first one there, which is a policy survey, just flew through with no problem at all. This was a little more difficult, but Prospectus, as you might know, publishes, I think, 6 issues a year, so they have lots of space to fill up. And this one was very difficult as well, and will come out a bit later. Okay, Rachel, any comments on that? Was that a productive way to learn about academic life?
Absolutely. I think publishing is as an integral part of academic life. Publish or perish, it's a milestone you have to get to. And if we didn't have this requirement, I know many PhDs that graduate without having any publications, and it makes it very difficult then for applying for things. At the moment, I'm applying for postdoctoral positions, and with an unfinished PhD, the important thing is they look at your publications, and so it can help prevent a gap between the PhD and future academic career. I think also I was very grateful for, and I know Khadija was too, the guidance that was provided by Anthony and Renee through this process, and that was very helpful. So we took turns in being first author and dealing with the review process, the submitting process, and through that we got to learn how it all happens and how it takes place. That was really valuable because I think in a lot of humanities subjects, you kind of tend to do sole author publications, and that can be quite lonely and difficult, and you have to learn it all by yourself. But this made it a lot easier because we were in a group, we could discuss things together. There was a lot of debate because comparing Melbourne and Brussels, they're both very different jurisdictions. We had somewhat different methodologies, and so it was sometimes hard to make comparisons. But it was very valuable. I think it also made it a lot easier in the sense analysing what happens in Melbourne, because I had a reference point with Belgium, and at one point Shanghai as well. We had a PhD student who was involved in the first article from KU Leuven, and so that really helped kind of looking at the different, making it a comparative PhD without it being a comparative PhD, because that would have just made it double the length. It was really valuable, and I really liked now graduating and having so many publications. It's very helpful. So yeah, I think that was an excellent process. And this project is not a thesis by publication, so it's kind of rare to have so many publications without a thesis by publication, which you can do in other programs that are not joint PhDs, I think. But this is so this was sort of an extra component, which was very helpful and I think very valuable.
Okay. From here on, I'm just picking up some questions which are really about research methodology, and they're sort of dealt with in that middle article there, if anybody's looking for references. And at the end, I've got some ethics problems, personal ones. So I'll just go through what the research questions were. It was still close to COVID, so we were doing historical survey, and these were the inherited, the obligatory research questions, and there was already a focus on trust and distrust there. Okay. And the methodologies were surveying policies, public documents. Then we did do some surveys, and we're going to talk about those right now. And those were backed up by interviews. So mixed methods, as I think is standard these days in research in community translation and interpreting. Okay, let me see. I've got the questions. I'll start with Rachel, and then I'm interested in other people's experience. So we're going to do surveys, all right? We're going to answer those questions. How the hell do you start? How do you start contacting people? So what did you do, Rachel?
So in my case, I decided for the surveys, I wanted to have one for community representatives who were, so my focus was Dardi and Arabic speaking communities. So I had a community.
Why those communities?
Good question. Those communities, because Khadija was studying Arabic communities, so we could do some comparisons. Also, Arabic communities, there's a lot of diversity within Arabic communities, including religious diversity. So that enabled me to hopefully get a wider sample and look at more differences. Dardi speaking communities, because this is a language of need in Australia, and in terms of interpreting services. Arabic is a language of high reach, so a lot of translations go into Arabic because it's one of the top spoken languages in Victoria. Same with the Dardi. There's an increased population from Afghanistan, so it's becoming so I wanted to just compare these two languages to see if there were any differences, and I think, yeah, so those were the main reasons.
Okay. How good is your Arabic, Dari, Rachel?
Well, I don't speak either of those languages. I have a bit of Farsi, which is similar. My husband's from Iran, from the Kurdish area, so I have that. So I linguistically, I'm familiar with Persian kind of linguistic. Yeah, so there is Dari and Persian are quite similar. So I do understand a little bit. I don't have any Arabic, but I had translators translate the survey, and I had interpreters on standby for interviews. But I guess my background was public policy. So even though I couldn't offer much in terms of languages, hopefully that. My focus in the thesis was less on the languages itself, and they turned out to be not as the variables were not that great in those language groups. It was more about the policies, how the policies changed. So if that makes sense, it wasn't such a big focus. Yeah, so I got both surveys translated into Arabic and Dardi, and I rolled them out. And I also had a survey for translators and interpreters, which
what's interesting, Rachel, is that we're working on language policy, translation policy, and in our own research, we needed a translation policy.
Absolutely.
Okay, so firstly, you decided you're not in the community, you're outside the community, all right, which poses some advantages and disadvantages as well. Okay. But it's a decision you make at the beginning. And that means you need interpreters and translators. What happened with that language policy? Can you tell us about your use of translators and interpreters?
So I used NAATI certified translators, and I had it checked by community members. So that was the way the policy that I had for that.
You could explain NAATI is the Australian Accreditation Authority.
Yes, the National Accreditation Authority in Australia. So, and that was all fine. So I had all of that translated and then put into Qualtrics, and then I had it checked again by those same translators and community checkers, because it was me putting it into sort of doing the typesetting, I guess, into Qualtrics and making it there. These are
Qualtrics is the survey tool that we use. The online survey tool is Qualtrics. Okay, all right.
I'm sorry, I'm not explaining.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But
And
these
what
are
about
right.
the interpreters? That's what I liked. What happened to our interpreters for the interviews?
Well, this was a problem with this study. I guess a shortcoming of this study is that I found it very difficult to reach community members who needed interpreters, I guess, firstly. So the people that I interviewed wanted to speak in English, and their spoken English was much better than I guess perhaps their written English. There's also an interesting thing with Dadi is that so some of the Dadi community members that I interviewed are not fluent in Dadi in terms of writing, because because of the upheaval in Afghanistan that has disrupted education, and so there's that as well. There's also Hazargu, which is the language spoken by the Hazara community, which is a very big community in Victoria. So I decided to go with the official language so that I could reach Pashto speakers as well, that would have Dari and other smaller groups within Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a very diverse area with lots of linguistic and ethnic groups. So again, the language, the decision around language was quite tricky, but I was sort of, I guess, following what the government often does, which is translate Dari first, as hopefully a language that can be reached more widely. But there is a problem with translation, and that is that that a lot of people. So I spoke to a community representative from Dari and from a Dari speaker, and she said her parents could not do my survey because of that barrier in literacy. So that's another issue where the government has become aware of that, especially with COVID, that it needs to provide audio and video messages for these communities.
Rachel, we're going to have to go a bit faster here. I'll just point out that Khadija in Brussels is a part of the community she was studying. So she would go out and she would speak with people on the street or wherever she met them and go through the form and fill it out for them. And she was working in Moroccan Arabic and Amazigh, which are the languages she has, okay, as well as Dutch and French and English. So it's very different according to the position of the researcher. So how did you contact people? That's the basic problem.
Through NGOs, through the non-government organisations, community groups. There's a lot of them in Australia. A lot of community groups shared my survey through their links. I also tried Facebook groups. There's a lot of Afghans in Victoria kind of groups and Arabic speaking groups on Facebook. I shared it through personal networks and sort of everywhere. It's kind of, I also contacted all of the translators.
You got the number of people you needed?
I found actually the surveys were not so useful for my research. The greatest use of my surveys was in allowing me to pick people to interview. I didn't get as many as I would hope to have gotten. I think there was about 28 responses in the Dari community and close to 100 in the Arabic-speaking communities. So no, I didn't get the responses that I wanted, and the surveys were plagued with problems. For example, bots that had somehow got my surveys, and I had to manually delete several hundred responses that were not genuine, even though Qualtrics has quality control mechanisms in place. Somehow, these bots had managed to do my survey. So that it didn't really work. And I actually don't really use the survey much in my thesis, except to point out that it didn't work. And instead I rely mainly on the interview data, which was helpful. It was helpful as a recruitment mechanism for my interview.
I should point out that at one stage you were ready to go out to where the Afghan community sort of lives around Melbourne with an interpreter, like Khadija did in Brussels for the Moroccan community. And what happened, Rachel? It didn't happen, did it?
Well, the interesting thing about researching COVID during COVID is that the restrictions follow you. So unfortunately, we were in, I think it was the 5th wave or something like that when I was doing this research, and it just wasn't possible to travel anymore. We were on work from home orders, and yeah, so I wasn't able to travel to Dandenong and other places where these communities, where there's high density of these communities. So that was unfortunate, because that was a recommendation made by people that I interviewed that said that, well, if you want to hear from these people, you need to go to their communities because that's their safe place, and they're not going to fill in a university survey where they don't trust it, they don't understand it. But if you go to their communities, then they will talk to you and they will have coffee with you, and you will get to meet them. So that was an unfortunate part of my research that was affected by COVID, that I couldn't do that. But Khadija did that very successfully. She got a lot of surveys through, and also because of her language skills, she was able to help, particularly the older generation who might not fill in an online survey, but they were able to fill in a paper survey with her help. So that was, it worked in her case. It wasn't so successful in mine. Oh, so this is a visual.
So just before we go to that, so that affects the representativity of your sample.
Yes.
So we did see that Khadija's sample had more elderly people, yours had fewer. So what do you do with that? You've just thrown it out. You've got 28 responses or 100. What do? You say, well, it's not representative, so throw it away, or
Some of the responses that people hadn't filled out the whole survey or things like that. So there were some that were not able to be used. They hadn't produced good quality data. But some of them were interesting. Like there were definite trends in, for example, some communities had a higher rate of trust in government. So you could see some trends, and it was interesting to see information sources, what information sources people turned to for COVID information. This information was very helpful for me when I interviewed some of these people who had elected that they were interested in a follow-up interview. So then I was able to ask them some of the answers that they had given more about that, and they were able to, and that really helped fill in the blanks for me and help me understand the data for the survey. So it was helpful in that way, and it certainly helped with the interview process. But yes, there are definite disadvantages to surveys. And if I had to do it again, I think using perhaps a market research company to do the surveys where they have more control checks built in and they can do a large scale survey might be the way to go. This is a very common tool used in Germany at the moment in measuring community attitudes. So I think, and they use market research service, the universities use market survey companies for that. The government also uses these companies to get large scale data. So I think that's probably the way to go is to outsource it. And then
when you get lots of money from Germany to do it. Okay. I think there is a limit that we recognize. The sole researcher, I guess, really for this project, it's just you, can't do what a big company can do. However, we had done studies with the group in Melbourne previously on this and related topics, looking at more communities. I think we had 4 or 5 communities we were looking at. And it was very clear that there were patterns. Even though the samples are not as big for some communities, there were very, very, statistically significant different patterns that we got from that. And you can always lean back on the previous research that's been done on a more quantitative basis and inherit that, I think. But yeah, you just have to recognize the limitations. Anybody else with similar experiences there? I'll just show the work that Rachel did there. Okay. So the surveys, but the interviews were more useful for you. Can you say anything about that interview process?
Yes, so one stakeholder group that I added to the interviews, which I didn't have for the surveys, was policymakers, and that was very helpful to interview them and find out whether policy and practices had changed and how they went about procuring translations and whether they were following the Victorian government policy, which is to use Ngāti credentialed interpreters and translators. So that was very interesting. The interviews were very helpful, and because I had chosen sort of 4 groups of interviews for policymakers, community representatives, community members, and those in the translation sector, it helped to give it, I guess, maybe perhaps more representation, because if I had have just interviewed one of those groups, I would have only been hearing one perspective. But all these groups were able to shed light on different aspects of language policy during COVID. So that was very helpful.
How many people did you interview, Rachel?
I think there are 35 official interviews. There was a few off the record, which were very helpful.
Off the record of the policymakers, or who's
Yes.
off the record?
Off the record of policymakers.
Yeah. Why are they off the record without revealing who they are?
Because there's a code of conduct for policymakers that they don't that they have to be very careful about what they say, and they can't give public comment, I think, or they can't be critical of policies. So there's perhaps
That's what I'm interested in. They can't be critical of. Yes. Okay. Good. We're coming to that later.
Yes. So there is that. I did all interviewees are anonymous, and even gender is removed so that there's no one can sort of work out who they are. So there is, and that actually freed up many policymakers, because they said that they couldn't tell me this stuff if they weren't protected. But it wasn't so controversial, I don't think. I wasn't asking them to be critical. I mean, I was also at the time I was doing these interviews, I was an employee of the Parliament of Victoria. So I was also, in many ways, I wasn't trying to elicit kind of risky research or anything like that. I just wanted to know how policymakers were procuring translations, what services they were using, what problems did they find, were they abiding by policies, and what sort of changes had occurred during COVID. So it was just more like...
Actually, a minute, because this goes through the ethics committee, it has to get approval, so we have to make sure it's anonymous, etc. You remove gender for the policymakers, but you remove gender for everybody. Or not?
I moved gender for everybody, and that was actually...
That's problematic for me.
So this was actually based on one of the articles that we submitted. A reviewer commented that this could be ethically problematic because we were identifying gender and, for example, someone's language group, so that they thought that this would be in breach of ethics. So after that, I made the decision to remove gender. It also, so when I talk about gender, just for example, like he said this or something like that, or she said that. So it was not a big part. Not like other surveys that go into age group or anything like that, or I've tried to remove any identifying features. Another thing is that removing gender eliminates the problem where, for example, if you had members of the LGBTIQ plus community, then they could be singled out very very clearly because they're a minority in the study. So for me, it was helpful actually removing gender, because it just gives me a bit more peace of mind that that hopefully these people cannot be traced to their comments, especially if they are being critical of government policy. They want that reassurance that they are protected, and they've given.
Rachel, look, you removed gender from your research, and we know that these are communities. I think, where men and women are sociolinguistically different, have different social roles. They're going to have different perspectives on behavior change communication. I mean, okay, you did your master's on gender studies, Rachel. Are you sure you really just want to get rid of gender because of anonymity?
Well, there are still comments in my thesis about gender where it's relevant. So where they've talked about differences and for example, gender as a gatekeeping mechanism. So where gender might influence someone's control to someone's agency over getting vaccinated or the information that they receive. That is still in the thesis. It's just about participants. Anonymity. So it's not gender still features, and gender is still there. It's not discussed in too much detail because, as you know, I'm already 20,000 words over the word count. So
yes, okay.
So I need to cut.
Wait. Clara Dog's got a very good question that we have discussed at some length. What's the difference between community representatives and community members here?
So, good question. So, community members, I refer to people who are users of translations and interpreting services. Community representatives are, I guess, community leaders, people who have agency within their community, or sort of not agency, but people who have a definable role within their community. So they might head a representative group.
Hey, man, silence yourself, please, mate. There you go.
Sorry, I thought they were asking a question. Yeah, so that's the difference. So, and community representative also included broad multicultural representative bodies that represent all multicultural groups. So it was just a way of speaking with of community representatives.
Okay.
And
But these would be the users, and these would be the people with some political role in the community. Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
So, interview data can be representative.
Interview data has its limitations. Yeah, it certainly has its limitations. But I aimed for it to be representative by interviewing different groups. Of course, there's subjective opinions being expressed.
Wait. So, wait a minute, go back. Community representatives are all community members themselves, says Clara. Yes, I would assume.
No, and not all. So I do have subcategories. So when I talk about community representatives, there is a broad category in that. For example, the head of some peak organisation. You've got many in Victoria, like FECA and the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria, the Multicultural Centre for Women's Health. You've got many peak organisations, and this would be talking about people people that I spoke to that represent multicultural communities more generally. So there was kind of like three subgroups in that group: Arabic speaking community leaders or people who had influence in their community, and then people Dari speaking representatives, and then a broad category. So to speak.
Yeah, I think the only rule there is be clear. Our terms are slippery. We don't really have good terms, but when you're writing up, you just be clear. Carmen has a good question here on gender. She's working on forced displaced people. Is it ethical to ask for the gender in the survey, and if so, how? Clara says yes. Oh, I see, says Clara. Okay. No, that was the previous one. Is it ethical to ask for gender? If it's pertinent to the topic, obviously, I think you can't just pretend ethics doesn't exist. What do you reckon, Rachel?
Yeah, well, I guess for me, a lot of my decisions were shaped around what the ethics committee had to say. So they always ask, is it relevant? Is it relevant? Is it relevant for every variable that you want to
So
check? And you
you
have
go back to your research question, and if genders are variable in the research question, then yes. If not, then not. So if you're working on forced displaced people, which is like a sex trafficking and things, well, hell yeah. That's got to be in your research question, I would think. Anyway, let's move on. Good question, Carter. Here's one for you, Rachel. And I have this problem first. Do you believe everything that people say in the interviews?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think there is good faith there, and I think also a part of them being anonymous helps because they don't have to protect themselves they don't have to polish their words as such. They can be more, they don't need to worry. They're representing a group. So I think people were honest with me, but they're also presenting a subjective experience, and it's also an experience in time. If you interview them, at the beginning of the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, towards the end, they might actually have different opinions, different experiences. So people, I mean, just as we all have different opinions that change. I think though, some of them were representing their professional opinion, and then for that they might want to be a bit more vocal about certain aspects to get a stronger recommendation around funding, or that might happen as well.
Did you find that some people are speaking to impress the university? There's a white coat effect that you'll be interested in this because you're a linguist, or I'm also interested in the number of expert translators in the sample. Everybody could complain about translations except their own. There's something wrong there.
I did interview translators who reflected that they would have changed words, or they also reflected on the process of translation, that there's always, things that you might say differently at a different point in time, or if you spend. So there is, I think I spoke with people that were quite open and generous in what they said, and flexible. So I'm not sure, but I think giving people anonymity helped them to present a good, help them I don't know, sorry, I'm not being very articulate, but help them to present what they felt at that point without,
The interviews were carried out during COVID, and you had other interviews after COVID, is that correct?
Yes, I conducted some. There were more sort of follow-up interviews. So some people who might have spoken to me off the record then were interested in talking after sort of, particularly in relation to translation issues and translator issues. So that was just some follow-up interviews that I conducted.
Would that time difference have accounted for the different things they were saying then?
I don't think so. I think it was just more things, maybe there was a more pressing need for, there was a lot of changes that happened, and then it was more interesting to reflect on we could see now a clearer policy trend. So that was that. So some interviewers were speculating, and then now they kind of could see more what had changed. So they were perhaps more informative with a distance of time. But I wasn't doing a longitudinal study or anything like that. This was just by chance.
When you got the interview data, and it's a lot, interviews generate tons and tons of data, you have to select what to put in your report. So how do you do that? Do you get the most extreme ones, or the middle of the road ones? The boring ones? Yeah.
Well, you select your data based on what you're trying to say. I think I mean, I worked for many years as a committee researcher, where we did public hearings, and the transcription is compiled by Hansard. They follow us around for these committee hearings, and they're all publicly available. And then you have to write the report based on the issues of the committee and the recommendations that you want to make. And you have to be completely transparent, because anyone can check the transcript and see, well, this was taken out of context or this was not right. So I've kind of been trained, I hope, to be very balanced and representative in choosing data. Obviously, these interviews are not publicly available, unlike transcripts, but I do try to consider how best to represent people, because they will, read my thesis and they want to know that they won't be able to identify who they are, even if no one else can. But certainly, I don't want to misrepresent anyone. So certainly, I take the middle of the road, but I do obviously want interesting opinions. I think a strategy that I had was just interviewing different groups. So when someone says, well, translations are bad and they're terrible, or when someone says, well, public servants only use the cheapest quote, and then will you ask them that, and then they say something different. So it's about presenting different sides and different aspects to a problem and different perspectives, and you can look at what the constraints are, institutional constraints and things like that. So I think that helped to balance out any sort of where there might be extreme opinions expressed. Then you can balance it out with other things.
Yeah. The interest for me in interview data is, you get your research questions, you get your hypotheses, you got your variables, you operationalize the variables. So in theory, you've got just these little things you're looking for. You can go through and do a keyword search and code them. And so you select the data that addresses your questions, basically. That makes sense. But always, the interview, somebody says something that you didn't think about beforehand. It wasn't in the hypotheses. It's a variable that you didn't even dream of, and it comes out of the interviews, and you get this dialectic process feeding back into it. Did that happen in your process? Your research?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I certainly came in with my own assumptions, especially from reading the media about how translations are conducted, and you read the negativity, and then when you start actually analysing it, you realise, well, some of the so-called translation problems were actually typesetting issues or happened in the production of the translation. They were not. They were attributed to the publishing process. It has nothing to do with the translation. So you do tend to find these different things. You also find that I think all of the stakeholders had very strong assumptions about different agents, actors in the process. But through my interviews, I found that some of these assumptions were unfounded, and they're to do with not understanding the other side. So you certainly do find, and constantly, one of the things I love about interviews is that it's constantly bringing up new information and new perspectives. And I was an outsider in translation studies, and I learned so much in the last couple of years in a field that I didn't know. So certainly I was constantly discovering new things. So it was very valuable.
The other rule with interview data, for me anyway, is that you have to stop at some stage and not keep feeding stuff into your thesis or your research report, because it will never end. So unfortunately, it's just the pragmatics of what a report is. You can't convey everything. Here I get into the ethics bit, and let's say we've been going a long time. So I'll just put this in the context of COVID in Australia. All over the world there were similar problems, I think, but very quickly there was very negative press. And I in class, because I was teaching a course with 7 or 8 languages, and we started testing the COVID translations, and we found that there were really weird things happening. So I knew that things were difficult, and I had personally this ethical problem. What do I do as an academic? Okay. Particularly in the context of Australia, we have the National Accreditation Authority, which is very active and very bureaucratic, and doesn't just, well, okay, it does many things, but I'm not going to go into that. It concerns how much one can say as a researcher. And I'm just going to give you an example, okay? This is from a report not by us, by Erica, and we have people who are interpreters, translators, but in this case, interpreters, complaining about other people in the profession, all right? And these things were picked up. And in a paper that I've recently written with Rachel, we actually pick up and cite the second one of these, okay? And in a very elaborate and exciting review process of this paper, our anonymous reviewer, who might be present today, but I suspect not, picked up and said, should you repeat this? This is denigrating the profession. This is a blaming Nati for the presence of low quality translations. And I thought, well, yeah, if they said it, and it's not just one person, it's sort of a body of opinion there. Of course, we should repeat that, and why not? And then it occurred to me that I'm actually a member of the Translators and Interpreters Institute in Australia, the association, the professional association, which has a code of ethics. And part of the code of ethics says that I have to support my fellow professionals, uphold the reputation and trustworthiness of the profession. So ethically, as a member of this professional association, should I repeat the criticisms of the profession? What do you reckon, Rachel? What's your answer there? You're not a member of Ausit, so you're okay. Okay.
Well, I think again, the having all participants anonymous helped me because they could give their opinion.
Oh, this is anonymous too, but even then, our reviewer said, really, you should not.
I think though, when you're doing research, you're trying to find, I guess, a bit of the truth. If there's any such thing, you're trying to find the problem, and speaking about the issues can actually lead to the solutions. So we can work out what actually is the problem. Is it poor quality translations, translators? Is it the accreditation system? Is it the government policy? Is it language service providers not paying enough or not selecting the highest quality? What is actually the process? Is it based on language group? So I think it actually is important to speak about problems, but I'm from outside, so I'm not bound by the ethics. But I also was bound by a code of ethics about not being.
And your policymakers were bound by their code of ethics as well. So it's not just the translators; it's happening all over the place. You know something there, and you can't put it out. Yeah. Is it Kayhan? I don't know how to pronounce the name, but there's a good point there. I mean, I am a translator, so I'm bound by that code. But when I'm doing research, am I still a translator? And I do think that academic research has its own ethics, but not necessarily those of the translators. However,
Anthony,
I do want to phrase, yeah, Mustafa.
Anthony, I was going to say that when you report your findings here, you're no longer a translator. You're acting as a researcher. So you're wearing a different hat. So the ethics question is not a real question here. You just report your findings as you found them in your data. The more serious question here is to what extent this kind of responses have been frequently provided in the data, and to what extent they're representative. And another thing is
data is not representative.
Yeah,
no data.
And another thing is what Rachel has just clarified in relation to the quality of translations. I think as researchers, we can also provide a broader context for interpretation of the claims reported in interviews or other types of data by, especially in the discussion section, where we put all the findings together and we go through them and analyze them or reflect upon them based on different sources of data and also based on the literature. So, for example, in relation to translation quality, we can't just take one statement like one of these and project it to apply to the whole translation industry in a given country. There are a lot of other processes.
The chief medical officer in Victoria, and it was such a personalized thing. This guy was Brett Sutton. You could buy your Brett Sutton quilts and go to bed with Brett and I don't know. It was highly personalized, highly trust-based, and that discussion was countered all along the way by COVID deniers and conspiracy theorists, and very, very hot public debate. Um, uh, uh, um, the Arabic community in Melbourne was especially, that's okay, Mustafa, you're back on track, was
Sorry about that.
especially critical of anything coming from the government. And it was in the middle of that we got these reports that Rachel just mentioned of absolute cock-ups in translation services where languages are being mixed up in the same messaging over here and here. Rachel found out in her interviews that it wasn't the translators who did this, it was typesetters who didn't know what languages were being done. But the public image of translations and of NATI certified translators at that point was abysmal, was very, very low. And I then personally had journalists coming to me and asking me, because I happened to be professor of translation studies at the University of Melbourne. And I had this doubt, what do I say? They say, are the translations really bad? Yes, look, I've done this in class, with the Arabic, with the Burmese and Nepalese and lots of different languages. And yes, I know it's problematic, but do I tell you it's problematic and feed into the distrust that's in the community? Or do I give mitigating circumstances? So you can just see here what bloody journalists do to my words. It was a mess, Pym said. No, Pym never said it was a mess. I just talked about there were some mistakes, etc., and I gave some examples. But then bloody journalists are not interested in nuance, subtlety. Don't give examples to journalists. They'll take them out and put in the headline. And Rachel has seen the same thing happening when people give evidence to public inquiries, for example. And I got really frustrated. I'll do the first person narrative for a bit to get this off my chest. I learnt by error never to trust journalists. I had been through training at the University of Melbourne about how to speak with journalists, and it didn't work. So some guy from television there asked me about this, and I said on the Zoom, yeah, look, just come to me back. I'll talk about this. In half an hour, I'll set up the lights and everything with the background so I look really good. So what gets on television, it's this ghost-like figure in a black cave with really bad sound. I think, you bastard. So not only do journalists manipulate your words to get the extreme opinion, they also don't pay any attention to your public image. So I'm just getting back at them. All right. I did take the position that I should point out the difficulty of translation, the many intricacies of the workflow, and say that the professionals in Australia are very good and very highly qualified, and they have the best accreditation authority in the world, which I think is generally true. Don't tell Nati I said that about them, but I took that as an ethical position, sort of balanced. But on balance, I I am a translator. On balance, I do feel obliged to support the profession to the degree that it's worth supporting. Uh, so this isn't Rachel's problem because she's not a translator. It's me, more me. Uh, Now, this came later with some studies that have been carried out on work conditions among, especially interpreters. Australia has far more community interpreting than written translation. And in the press, we get claims like, as you can see here, the industry grapples with a mass exodus. They claim that people are leaving the profession at a massive rate. Down here is claimed one interpreter is leaving the industry every week. Okay. And this is actually it's the press in Western Australia, but I am from Perth originally. This I liked as well. This is a traumatized WA interpreter. No, this is Heather Glass. She's my master's student. She's not traumatized. She was speaking on behalf of the community. Okay. Now, look, I do know where these claims come from because there have been some studies, and I'll come to one of them in a minute. But okay, just do the numbers, all right? So this is my role as an academic. Okay, they say one a week. Fair enough. That's 52 a year, right? But I know how many interpreters are in the census as being interpreters, main profession, 3,900. And that means it's 1.3% a year. That is really ridiculously low. It's not scandalous. It sounds scandalous, but if you get it in the ruck of professions, any liberal profession has between 4 and 5% a year. And in the years after COVID, there was a great attrition rate, and you get very, very high people leaving professions like nursing and teaching, which are similar to interpreting in some ways. So that claim might be correct, but it's not scandalous. And then there's a big study by the Department of Home Affairs, 2,300 people, I think. So it could claim some representativity, where it's reported 1/3 say they are likely to leave the sector. And this is in the report from this survey. And that is the exodus that got into the press, right? Mass exodus, 1/3 leaving the sector. And this is really problematic. Okay, now in this paper, which is online with Rachel, but it's more me, so don't blame Rachel for this one, I went through and looked at their sample, and then I said how many people in that sample did say that leaving is extremely or somewhat likely, and then how many said it would be extremely likely within 2 years. And I get down to 113, which means 2.5% a year. Again, ridiculously low. So these scandalous things in the press come out to be sociologically really quite reasonable and even suspiciously not alarming. Now, what's my job as an academic? Is it to point out that the statistics are overblown and badly reported in the press? I think so. Am I being neutral? I don't know in that case, because I do want to support a profession, but I don't like bullshit. And there's something deep within me that says my job as an academic is to fight against public bullshit. Sorry for using an illustrative term. Now, my problem is this at the moment. Those reports in the press, those reports on the survey, have been fed into a public inquiry on multicultural Australia. And the image of the interpreting and translation sector there is abysmal. That things are going really, really badly, when in fact they're not that bad in Australia, I think. And they feed through to these findings. Okay, one is it's so bad you've got to redo your language policy. I don't think anybody there had read the Australian language policy, which I think is very good. And it supports a common language and it supports multilingualism very strongly. I don't know why that's there. And then boost Ngati, okay, boost funding. I couldn't for the life of me see anything in the data that says how this accreditation authority was going to solve any of the problems that were named there. And I do find that Ngati makes $1.8 million profit a year and it has an equity of about 13 million. So what's going on? Okay, what's my ethical problem? Do I support the profession? Yes. Do I just sit back and let journalists and public inquiries and the people who speak with loud voices create a really bad image of the profession? I suggest no, that it's my ethical role to do the numbers and put up with all the criticism that comes on top of it. Um, okay, that's my ethical problem. Rachel, are you supporting me in this or not?
Yes, I think, I mean, I only have those surveys to go back on and the data provided to us by the government. So that was very helpful. In my interviews, and I had a small number of translators and interpreters in the overall number of, I did find that there was a strong, I guess, in certain language groups, for example, Arabic, there were a lot of people that were very dissatisfied and wanted to leave, or
Yeah,
perhaps they didn't want to leave, but they wanted to reduce the amount of
that's
translation.
the thing. That's what I should have said, Rachel. Yeah, that big survey asked, "Are you going to do? How likely is it you will leave the sector?" Right? But it didn't ask, will you reduce the number of hours you spend interpreting or translating? Because what people do is they combine translation and interpreting with other occupations all over the world. You know, they're 70% part-timers, more or less. So what happens if you're not getting paid well? You go and do other things and reduce the percentage of it. As people are saying there, you know, people are not happy about the pay for translators, and I understand that. And there's lots of evidence for that, that they're being underpaid. But how the hell there's this accreditation authority has no remit concerning pay, remuneration. Okay. So I don't know where in these recommendations you're going to fix up the pay. What we did find, though, through Rachel's work and the interview data, etc., is where the pay problem could be. Where is it, Rachel, do you think? How can we improve payment to translators and interpreters?
Well, I think there's a wide perception in my interviews that public servants the government chooses the cheapest option when it comes to procuring translation. The people that I spoke to, of course, denied that this was true. However, I think also perhaps there should be more regulation of language service providers where there's not a lot of transparency. Although they operate under a business model, and a for-profit business model for most of them, there's not transparency with how much they pay, and some of the language service providers said to me that we can't guarantee that the other language service provider across the road is not offshoring jobs and things like that, and we don't know if they're actually using accredited translators. This is not being fed back, so the policymaker themselves doesn't understand what they're purchasing, or the public servant. They don't understand the value of translations. They don't understand the difference in translations in terms of accreditation. So this is also a problem. So they just know that they need to get an Arabic translation, and they don't know, and they contact a language service provider, and we don't know how much of a profit the language service provider is making and how much the translator is actually being paid. So there is this problem with transparency, I think, in the industry,
Okay.
and that's we need more regulation.
Of all these recommendations, which one fixes that? None. All right. Also, no,
Yes.
the other point is just aesthetic, but it's a fairly important point, and it was repeated as well, that the main buyer of interpreting and translation services in Australia is the set of governments, the state and federal governments, right? And these are the people paying the low prices. So government can regulate that within itself. It's also the National Accreditation Authority is owned by who? The governments of Australia. Okay, it's just unaesthetic, let's say, that the main buyer of translation services is also the main main certifier of translators, which then has no remit in the field of remuneration. It's for me, there are serious problems in Australia with recognition of the value of translation and interpreting, that academic research has a real role to play there, showing the value and the consequence of errors, for example, and inadequate services. But this sort of, I'm very disappointed in this particular public inquiry, and in the recommendations that led to it, seems to miss the point. And there are many other things that can be done, including unionization, which is, it's got to be among the professionals themselves to get the solution, not to look to the government for regulation, I suggest. Okay, but
There has
Rachel's a government person.
well, not anymore, but there has been moves towards moving from a contractor model, a so-called contractor model of language service provision to an employment model. And sometimes this works quite well. For example, well, from what I've heard in New South Wales, where they have interpreters on staff that are employed by, for example, the Department of Health. I haven't conducted a thorough analysis into this, but there is perhaps maybe there needs to be public servants employed in translators employed within the public sector. So that might be a way of ensuring that there's an appropriate wages and appropriate work for them. And but yes, these are big problems, and I don't know.
Part of that's in the national capacity thing there, I guess. Okay, so there are problems in Australia. Our research can't solve all the problems. But when our data indicates the existence of the problems, I suggest that as academics, our responsibility is to show them without losing support for the value of the profession. That's all. Okay. I want to have it both ways there. And I haven't resolved that problem at all. Okay. I have just one slide left. I don't know if there's anybody who's got something similar to say or has a way of resolving that problem for me. I'd love to hear from you. Well, you're not going to solve that problem for me, okay. Particularly since you saw I get accused of operating in the interests of the powerful. I wish somebody in power knew about that and could appreciate what I'm doing. This came out this morning for us in Europe, and probably yesterday for you guys in Australia. This is NATI, our accreditation authority, with a position statement on the use of AI, which is interesting. Now, I just throw this in here because I'm doing a lot of research at the moment, as many people are, on the use of AI in translation and interpreting. And this position statement gets to the right conclusion at the end, I think. I might even have read my book on risk management, who knows? But has no research. It refers to no empirical research at all. No academic research that's been done, no statistics. And I'm just wondering how these things can go ahead between the regulation authority and the profession and the various bodies, reaching an outcome on a problem that's facing us all, but not turning to academic research or any kind of research at all. And that worries me. I think we need to be more active as academics and get on board and interact with these people more. Any comments on that?
This is a great comment. Maybe it was written by AI. This is a comment in the chats.
Yeah, it also, I note in passing, contradicts the Aussie Code of Ethics that I just cited from, where translators are supposed to produce accuracy and not transgress role boundaries. The more you become a risk manager, the more you give advice, the more you are transgressing the role boundaries as envisaged by the Code of Ethics. So I could have great fun. In fact, I might have great fun just picking up this recommendation and pointing out that you have to go back and revamp your Code of Ethics in order to head down that way in the future. Any comments here? Yeah, Mustafa received it. It was written by AI. Okay.
Well, I was going to say that this is a position statement. It's just that, a statement. And my understanding is that research is in the background. So I'm sure Nati would have gone existing research, especially recent publications. And when they wrote this position statement, well, they didn't feel they had to make references to research findings because in the end, this is just a position statement, not a research paper or report.
Are you sure, Mustafa?
That's my assumption.
I would hope that's true. I really would. Okay. And I've had some very, very good productive conversations with the people at NATI. I have no reason at all to doubt the good faith of this. And I actually agree 100% with the conclusion that they reached there. I just would like to see more interaction with academic research. That's my one point to make on this thing. Okay, that was it. That's our presentation. I'm open to questions if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, do we have any questions or comments?
Asking how you analyze the interviews, Rachel?
Not how I analyze them in terms of software, I guess. I didn't. Yes, I didn't use any software. I tried to use. I can't remember the.
We usually use NVivo.
NVivo.
Doctoral students, yeah.
I tried to use NVivo, but I just found it too complex with the coding. It didn't seem to be picking up everything. So I just did it manually, actually, just reading through the transcripts and marking them with codes. And that is sort of the methodology that I used at Parliament, which was when we get sometimes we get over 1,000 pages of, if we have a big inquiry, 1,000 pages of transcribed public hearing evidence and submissions. So for some submissions, we had many submissions. So I would just do searches through them and reading through it and marking it. And that kind of was the way that I guess it naturally occurred to me. So that's what I did. So I didn't use any fancy software or anything like that. But yeah, that was the way that I did it.
Yeah. Your supervisor is fine with that, by the way.
Yes, yeah, I know. Of course they were.
I use NVivo myself, but you can do it with just searching for keys and things. Clara asks if technology was one of the issues we discussed. It wasn't, was it, Rachel?
No, no, it didn't really come up that much. I mean, sometimes there were comments about Google Translation being used, but not a big part of it.
Yeah. We have done research with the group in Melbourne on MT and now AI for emergency messaging, but that's a different project. What's this? Esther says, providing instructions as fees would be considered against competition law. Yes, and in the United States especially. And I think in Australia there is a system of minimum wage, though. You can fix the lowest wage that people should get for full-time employment. Like there's a minimum wage in Spain as well.
I guess the problem with minimum wage is that it's, I think, I might be wrong on this, but it's calculated as an hourly rate, and translations could take, different translators could spend different amounts of times on them. It's probably more appropriate for interpreters. But then I guess interpreters, one of the wage issues at the moment has been interpreters being booked for half-hour or 1 hour slots for court hearings that really take half a day to get there. And so there is certainly problems with that. That is where a minimum wage for that profession might be helpful.
I personally think all translation work should be by the hour these days because of the role of technology. Esther, can you perhaps tell us what's going on in Spain there? No?
Do you mean regarding the court interpreting?
Well, you're talking about the Spanish Association.
Oh yeah, that was in relation to the guidelines on collective agreements that would allow interpreters not to be considered like, I don't know, petrol companies that are going against competition laws. So individual workers, for as long as they work as freelancers, individually could gather and establish some minimum fees. I think that would apply to most translators in Spain, because fewer are working for within companies or institutions. But there seems to be no push for the government from translations to the government to apply those guidelines and to pass a law that actually allows them to agree on a specific fees, on minimum fees.
Yeah,
And
same in
so I was interested if anyone
one of the
else.
measures proposed. Yeah, a minimum fees, not, yeah. Okay, so we can do our work as activist academics to help that move along. Anything else there? What about giving incentives to people participating in research? Good question. Rachel, did we pay people?
Yeah, well, that was something that I did in my surveys. I had because you can't. I mean, I think Shuzia, our Rena's Chinese Beijing-based student. I think she was paying people for each survey. I think they got some credit or something in her survey was based in Beijing. For mine, I had I think you could win one of three $50 gift vouchers or something like that I was able to, if people wanted to participate in that, they left their details, and then that was drawn out. With surveys, I thought it was interviews, I thought it was very important to pay people, because they're giving you half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour of their time. And so I did apply for, at the University of Melbourne, I applied for that as part of my data allowance. So that I applied for a fund to pay for translations, to pay for interpreting if that was needed, and pay for survey and interview participation. So I gave all interviewees, except for people who were speaking on behalf of an organisation, because they were speaking as part of a representative body, but for translators and interpreters, community members and community leaders who were not in a paid position, we're not appearing as representing their work, they were paid $25 gift voucher. And I think that it was just fair, because there is this consultation fatigue that is happening with community leaders at the moment, and a lot of government work, they especially during COVID, they were required to work for free. There was this expectation that on them, but they're giving their expertise and their experience, and that should be valued. So I was very much in favour of incentivizing their participation, and yeah, so that was very helpful.
Yeah, all the big projects in Melbourne have paid participants with Coles vouchers to go to the supermarket. We're not allowed to give money anyway. Kayhan, where are you? You say you've got a union working with pay. Which country are you in? Australia. So, well, that's the union we know and love. Yes, and they might have some success, but it's been a long time. Okay. Okay, and Chris. And Chris, do you want to speak to us? We've got to finish now. Actually, it's 90 minutes is up. But do you want to say something, Anne Chris?
Yes, I can just say it. So, as I wrote in the comment, I actually had the pleasure of talking to Rachel last year. And I remember that she said that, hi, Rachel, that this might not have been a tendency in your interviews, but some of your informants had said that they wished for like more cultural mediation, and they had like preferences that were actually contrary to the official ethical guidelines for translators and interpreters. Is that correct? Do I remember correctly?
Yes, so there was this a push towards community-based mediation and not using translators and interpreters. It was interesting when I interviewed community members. Some of them spoke about how they don't trust a translator because then they don't know them. They prefer to trust people from their community. And I had community representatives who spoke about they use bicultural workers to do the translation because they feel like it's closer to the community and that there's more. So there was that they thought that the official translations were too technical and they were too far removed from the community. So definitely I found that there was a lot of tension between using mediators and translators, and we write about this in one of our papers about thick and thin trust as well, which is Anthony is an expert on that. It's very that people were drawn to the information where they had that thick trust in the community. Christina, you're doing very interesting research. Did you want to talk about? Because you did.
It's led by my colleague Tatiana, who's also listening now. So, but I was just interested. But we conducted some research on COVID translation in Norway, in Oslo. But I was wondering if you think that. This last slide, tailoring translation more to a specific audience, and do you think that that is related to this wish that some of your informants might have for like more cultural mediation? Or maybe it's just too far-fetched, but it just reminded me of that when I saw that slide. Maybe it's just like yes, as you said, like very unfortunate announcement from the Australian authority.
Okay. I think I might close the session, Mustafa.
Yeah,
Mikoto is
we'll-
asking why the union in Australia is struggling to get support. The membership is very low. I think that's, they need money, and translators don't have a lot of money. But anyway, yeah.
All right, we'll need to leave
Over
it
to
there. Thank you very much, Anthony and Rachel. It's been a pleasure having you, and we look forward to more presentations or webinars on your research. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Okay. See you. Bye-bye.